The heat inside the Camp Falcon motorpool felt heavy as Sergeant Brooke Hayes leaned over the open hood of an M1151 Humvee, her hands steady on the wrench, while engines rumbled around her. The air smelled of oil and dust, and every clang of metal bounced off the walls like part of a rhythm she had grown used to. She worked with quiet focus, never rushing, never wasting motion. Even as sweat traced along the edge of her sleeve, the younger Marines nearby watched her in that loud way that said they had too much time and not enough discipline. One of them spotted the faint ink on her wrist and tossed out a joke as if the whole bay was his audience. Another joined in, pushing the moment a little further, because her silence made an easy target. Hayes kept her eyes on the bolt she was tightening, her breathing calm as if the noise around her barely existed. There was no sharp look or comeback, only the steady click of her wrench locking the part into place. Then the doorway shifted with a presence everyone felt before they turned their heads. Colonel Marcus Hale stood there, still and sharp in the glare of the overhead lights. Conversation cut off in an instant as Marines straightened their posture out of habit more than thought. Hayes did not look up, but the air around her changed, as if the entire motorpool held its breath. Sergeant Brooke Hayes was the kind of Marine who slipped into the motorpool before the sky even considered turning blue. By the time most of the unit rolled in, the lights were already on. Her tool case was open, and she was bent over a vehicle with the steady rhythm of someone who found comfort in repetition. She moved with the same quiet discipline every morning, taking the same steps, checking the same inventory, and starting the first repair long before anyone else arrived. It was a routine that felt almost ritual, built from years of needing order, when everything else in life refused to stay still. Her posture always stood out to Staff Sergeant Miller, who had seen enough Marines to know when a story hid behind a uniform. She had the balance of someone who expected sudden noise and knew how to read a room without looking like she was reading it. He remembered a day when an engine backfired loud enough to make two privates jump and curse as if a round had cracked off the wall. Aides did not even flinch, lifting her head with a calm that made Miller watch her a moment longer than usual. To the younger Marines, she came off as distant or strange, the kind of person who stayed on the edge of their conversations and never took the bait when they tried to pull her in. They joked that she was too serious or too quiet, that she must have washed out of something bigger. They never stopped to wonder why her eyes tracked shadows the way some people track motion on a firing range, or why she never allowed herself to relax the way they did after a long day. The truth sat deeper than anything they imagined. Tucked behind memories she had no intention of sharing, memories that shaped the silence they mistook for coldness. Sergeant Brooke Hayes sat at the small kitchen table in her off-base apartment with the room lit by a single lamp that hummed softly in the quiet. The photograph in her hands was worn at the edges, its colors faded by dust and time, but the 6 figures standing on a rocky slope were still clear enough to pull her back to a world she had tried to leave behind. Their faces were smeared with grit, their gear heavy with the weight of long days in the mountains, and their eyes carried the tired focus of people who understood danger better than sleep. She traced a thumb along the blurred outline of the 7th operator, who was no longer in the picture or anywhere else in the world. Task Meridian had never existed on paper, at least not in the way other units did. Their missions took them into places where orders came in quiet bursts, and nothing was written down afterward. And their work was meant to solve problems without leaving a trail for anyone to follow. They handled extractions in the middle of broken terrain and cleaned up intelligence that was too sensitive to enter a formal chain of command. 7 of them went into the Hindu Kush on their final mission, and only 6 were carried out. Each one changed in a way that could not be measured by rank or medals. When the unit was dissolved, there were no ceremonies or debriefs, only reassignment papers that shuffled them into roles meant to keep them in the shadows. Harper ended up behind a desk. Jackson moved into logistics, and the others were scattered in similar quiet directions. Brooke chose the motorpool because it felt like the kind of place where no one would ask questions and no one would look twice at a mechanic with steady hands. She looked down at the serpent and compass tattoo on her wrist, its edges softened by time, and felt the familiar blend of pride and grief settle against her chest. The past never left her, no matter how deeply she tried to bury it, and tonight it pressed close enough to remind her that she had never really outrun it. Camp Falcon shifted the moment word spread that Colonel Marcus Hale was taking command. Marines tightened their movements without being told, and conversations dropped into lower tones, as if everyone felt the change before they understood it. His reputation for sharp inspections and strict standards reached the base ahead of him, and the routine hum of the day took on an edge that had not been there before. Even the motorpool felt different, the air thicker with anticipation as engines echoed under the metal roof. Brooke Hayes heard his name during a quick briefing and felt a flicker of recognition that she covered almost as fast as it surfaced. Her hands kept moving through the inventory list, but a single memory slipped past her guard, with the clarity of a voice carried over a calm radio channel. She remembered the dry air of the desert, the sting of grit on her skin, and Hale speaking with steady focus while everything around her spun into chaos. It was the last moment before the mission unraveled, and it was a voice she had not expected to hear again. When Hale finally walked through the gate later that day, the reaction across the base was immediate. Marines straightened as if pulled upright by instinct, and no one dared pretend not to notice his arrival. Brooke did not turn to look at him, yet something in her posture shifted, a tension settling into her shoulders that she hoped no one else saw. His presence here felt too deliberate, too precise to be coincidence, and the unease that settled in her chest told her that the past she had buried was not done with her yet. The inspection started without warning, the kind that made every Marine in the motorpool stand a little straighter, even before Colonel Marcus Hale came into view. He moved through the rows of M1000, 151 Humvees, with the calm authority of someone who had inspected more bays than anyone could count. His eyes catching details that others overlooked, Marines followed him with a mix of nerves and respect, answering his questions with short, steady replies. The motorpool felt smaller with him inside it, as if every sound waited for his approval before it dared echo off the walls. Brooke Hayes kept working on the vehicle assigned to her, tightening a mounting bracket with the same quiet precision she showed every day. Private Adam Lewis leaned on a tool cart nearby and let out another joke about her tattoo, as if the colonel was not 10 steps away. Brooke did not respond, and her sleeve shifted enough to reveal the faint outline of the serpent and compass along her wrist. Lewis smirked at his own comment, but the expression died when he saw the colonel's attention lock onto her arm. Hale froze in place for a single breath that felt longer than it should have. His eyes narrowed just enough for Hayes to know he recognized the mark, and the room seemed to tilt into silence. He turned his head slightly and told everyone in the bay to clear out, his voice even but carrying an edge no one questioned. Marines scattered without hesitation, boots hitting the concrete in quick steps until the hangar stood empty, except for the soft tick of cooling engines. Brooke set her wrench down and finally looked at him. Hale removed his gloves with slow movements and placed them on the nearest workbench. He rolled his sleeve up past his forearm, exposing the same tattoo, worn by time and marked by a thin scar running beneath the ink. The sight held the kind of weight that no words could carry, a reminder of a past that had lived in silence for years. Brooke felt the air shift between them, heavy with history, recognition, and the truth that nothing would stay buried now that he had seen her again. Rumors moved through Camp Falcon faster than any official memo, carried by quiet voices in the barracks and loud whispers in the chow line. The younger Marines who had once laughed at Brooke Hayes now drew crude snake sketches on scrap paper and left them near her tools, as if the joke had grown legs of its own. She ignored every one of them, wiping down a fender or checking a fluid level with the same calm focus she always brought to the job. Her silence only seemed to fuel the curiosity around her, but she let the noise pass over her, like weather she had learned to outwait. As the chatter spread, her senses tightened in ways she had not felt in years. She noticed a man standing near the entrance of the exchange one afternoon, holding a newspaper he never turned, and standing with a posture too controlled for a contractor. His eyes moved in slow sweeps that reminded her of surveillance checks. not casual shopping. Later that day, she spotted a black SUV idling outside the base perimeter fence in the civilian parking strip. A legal place to stop, but a strange place to linger, especially when it remained there long after most cars came and went. Back in the motorpool, Staff Sergeant Miller watched her scan the open bay doors with a sharpness he had not seen before. He asked if something was wrong, keeping his tone low enough not to draw attention. Brooke steadied a wrench in her hand and told him that nothing had happened yet. Choosing her words with care, the air around her felt heavier each day, and she knew in her gut that something dangerous was closing in, even if no one else sensed it yet. The motor pool had thinned out by late afternoon, leaving the tool cage quiet, except for the steady hum of overhead lights. Brooke Hayes reached for a socket set on the upper shelf, her hand brushing against a small folded piece of paper tucked behind the metal case. She opened it with the same calm she used when approaching an unfamiliar device, but the message inside hit with a colder weight. The words "You were supposed to stay dead" sat in neat block letters, the kind written by someone who wanted to be clear and untraceable. Her breathing did not change, though her eyes swept the shadows between the shelves and the open doorway beyond them. She listened for footsteps, for the shift of fabric, for anything that broke the stillness of the room. Her hand hovered near the M18, secured at her hip, close enough to draw if needed, but controlled enough not to show panic. Years of covert work had trained her to move without leaving ripples, and she slipped the note into her pocket, as if it were nothing more than a misplaced checklist. That night, her apartment felt colder than usual when she stepped inside. The lights flickered twice before settling, and she paused long enough to notice the silence pressing against the walls. Minutes later, the power cut out entirely, plunging the room into darkness, just as a low thump of rotor blades rolled across the neighborhood. The windows rattled as a helicopter passed overhead, flying low enough to make the dishes in her cupboard tremble against each other. Brooke stayed still in the dark, with her hand resting near her sidearm, knowing the message was not an attack, but a warning from someone who already knew far too much about her. Brooke Hayes walked into headquarters just after the sun touched the edge of the parade deck, her steps steady with purpose. The aide outside Colonel Hale's office looked up with a mix of confusion and caution, unsure why a sergeant appeared unannounced at this hour. He opened his mouth to question her, but something in her expression made him pause. He picked up the phone, spoke briefly, then nodded her through with a quiet gesture toward the door. Inside, the office felt too still for a place normally filled with movement and orders. Hale closed the door behind her, and the shift in his posture told her he understood why she had come. He crossed to a cabinet, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a black folder sealed with red tape that had no place in a standard headquarters. When he set it on the desk, the air carried the weight of things no one was meant to see again. He explained that Task Meridian had been erased from official records, its missions burned out of the system, and its survivors pushed into low-visibility roles. Brooke watched as he opened the folder and laid out photos of Harper walking out of a gym, Jackson stepping from a vehicle near a warehouse, and the body tagged as Briggs after a staged accident. A final report noted Reyes found dead in his apartment, ruled as natural causes, with no real investigation. Hale slid over recent satellite images, showing Brooke moving across Camp Falcon, each photo time stamped and taken from angles meant for tracking, not security. Her stomach tightened as she realized the patterns matched Meridian's old surveillance techniques, used now against its own people. Hale handed her a secure communicator, small and unmarked, and told her they had to reach the others before the next file went dark. Brooke closed her hand around the device, knowing the window for action was shrinking by the hour. Brooke Hayes stepped into her apartment with the steady focus of someone who no longer had the luxury of hesitation. She closed the door behind her, locked it out of habit rather than fear, and reached for the small duffel she kept in the back of the closet. Her hands moved quickly as she packed only what she needed, folding clothes with the practiced speed of someone who had packed in the dark more than once. Every item had a purpose, and nothing went into the bag that she could not carry at a sprint if the moment demanded it. When she finished, she paused in front of the mirror above the dresser. The woman looking back at her no longer carried the soft edges of a motorpool mechanic who blended into the background. Her shoulders were squared again, her breathing slow and controlled, and her eyes tracked the corners of the room as naturally as a pulse. She saw the operative she used to be, the one she had hidden under layers of quiet work and early mornings. The serpent and compass on her wrist caught the warm stripe of sunlight coming through the blinds, glowing enough to draw her attention. For years, it had felt like a mark she needed to cover, something that tied her to memories she fought to bury. Now it pointed forward, instead of back, reminding her that the path she had tried to avoid was the only one left. She touched the ink lightly, not with regret but with acceptance. She lifted the duffel and felt the weight settle into her grip. The decision was no longer a question but a direction, clear and steady in her mind. Brooke stepped away from the mirror, knowing she was done hiding, and that the work ahead required the part of her she once thought she had left behind. The main hangar at Camp Falcon filled with the low shuffle of boots as every mechanic, driver, and technician formed up for the mandatory briefing. Engines clicked as they cooled along the walls, and the big bay doors let in wide stripes of morning light that cut across the concrete floor. Colonel Marcus Hale stepped onto the small platform with a clipboard tucked under his arm, his voice steady as he laid out new security protocols for the entire division. Marines listened closely, the tone of his orders, leaving no room for questions or doubt. When he finished the last point, he set the clipboard aside in a slow and deliberate motion. The room quieted even more as he reached for the buttons of his jacket and slipped it off, folding it once before placing it on the podium. No one understood what he was doing until he rolled up his sleeve, revealing the serpent and compass tattoo etched into the muscle of his arm. The sight pulled a collective breath from the formation, and even the overhead lights seemed to hum louder in the silence that followed. Hale let the moment settle before he spoke again. He explained that the mark belonged to Task Meridian, a covert unit that never showed up in any manual and rarely sent all its members home. His voice carried a weight that made every young Marine listen as he said that Sergeant Brooke Hayes had been one of the finest operators in that unit. He told them she had saved his life and the lives of others during a mission that would never appear in any record they would read. Private Lewis and the others who had mocked her stood rigid, their faces stripped of every trace of humor. Hale placed a hand over his chest in a gesture of respect toward Hayes, a silent acknowledgement that carried more meaning than any ceremony. The entire formation turned to her, the shift in the air unmistakable, as they realized who she truly was. Brooke stepped forward with quiet composure, lifted her hand, and delivered a formal salute that echoed through the stillness of the hangar. The Marines snapped to attention in unison, the sound of their boots striking the concrete like a single thunderclap. In that moment, respect replaced every whisper and every joke, and the story of who she had been could no longer be hidden in silence. The hangar settled into a deep quiet after sunset, the kind that made every small sound feel louder than it should. Brooke Hayes sat beside a half-repaired Humvee with her back against the cool metal, letting the stillness wash over her after a day that had shifted the ground beneath her feet. The overhead lights hummed softly, throwing long shadows across the concrete floor. She stayed there without moving, letting her mind catch up to everything that had unfolded. Staff Sergeant Miller walked toward her with a slower step than usual, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. He told her that no one had understood who she really was, and that most of them were still trying to make sense of it. His voice held key respect, the kind that did not need to be proved with loud words or grand gestures. When he left, he gave her a small nod, as if acknowledging a truth that had finally come into view. Brooke remained in the quiet after he stepped out of the hangar. She listened to the faint wind drifting through the half-open doors and the distant hum of activity from the flight line. She looked down at the serpent and compass on her wrist, its shadow stretching across her hand, and felt no urge to cover it. It no longer felt like something she had to hide, but like a reminder of the path that shaped her. She rose slowly and brushed the dust from her uniform. Outside, The night sky stretched wide over the base, with lights from the runway glinting in the distance. She knew some stories lived in silence until the moment came to carry them forward again. Tonight, she felt ready to take the next step toward whatever waited beyond the gates of Camp Falcon.